And so if you can take wild game, which a lot of people say is gamey or earthy or whatever, and create a dish that your kids are craving to eat and people who are non-hunters want to go eat, that's that same me writing a book that people are reading and getting into my world. They're now getting into my head with a recipe. As little as it is making a stew. There's a million stew recipes out there. It's not going to be redone, but how can I take and not hide the wild game flavor, but enhance it into that stew?
All right, what's up, everybody? We've got a good one here today. Hopefully you aren't listening on an empty stomach, because I think if you are, then that's going to be a bit of a problem for you. But definitely if you're in the mood for hearing some great cooking recipes, just some cool stuff about hunting, we've got a good guest for that. So I'm joined by not my usual co-host. I think there was another podcast that we did that Mark was out for. He's been on this big Washington Blacktail trip for a bit. So actually Sawyer joins me here. And Sawyer, you've been on one before, right? You cooked with us.
Yep.
So this is your shtick. You come on when it's cooking related.
Yeah, I try to stay in my lane, I guess. But yeah, I was on the infamous burrito cook-off episode.
Bit of a wild card too. You had a pretty outlandish, not outlandish, and I don't want to come across negative way, but you had a pretty wild recipe that you did there. What was it? Turkey, and it had kimchi in it and all kinds of.
Yeah, Jeremiah, I think you would have dug it, man. Did some wild turkey fried rice, some homemade kimchi. God, what else was in there? Bok choy.
Yes.
Yeah, it got a little freaky, but
it did.
It turned out pretty good.
You guys sell bok choy in Wisconsin?
You can. You gotta know.
It's probably super expensive too out there versus getting it out here with all the Asian culture we have. And
so yeah, we actually touched on that in the episode. It's just like knowing where to go to get certain things, because there's a bunch of Asian supermarkets where you can get all of that stuff dirt cheap, and I don't think a lot of people know that.
You got to be in the know.
Yep.
So. But then, we're joined by Jeremiah Doughty of From Field to Plate. And Jeremiah, this is your first time on this podcast, so I guess we got to have you introduce yourself. Now, if you already follow him, you know him, and we've had you in a video already, or one of our Trailblazers videos. So people might have seen you there. But, for the listeners out there who haven't heard from you yet, why don't you give yourself an intro?
Yeah, so my name is Jeremiah Doughty, and I hail from the deep south, the Southern California. I like to say it's the non-hunting capital of the world. If you're going for big game and stuff like that, if you're going for upland game birds or waterfowl, it's one of the best, and it's kind of that little hidden gem, especially for some of those birds that you guys don't get out there, like your certain teals and pintails and stuff like that. We have it's part of that Pacific flyway. It's absolutely incredible. I am a wild game chef. I've self-taught, travel all over the world, getting to eat and cook really, really cool exotic foods, and have been able to share that with over 390 new adult hunters in the past 4 years and introduce them into hunting. And that's kind of where it all started. Was just, I was a new adult hunter in the world of big game hunting and had no idea what I was doing. And so when I first started, YouTube really was just a thing that some hillbilly posted a picture of them skinning a deer with a golf ball and a, truck. And it was hard to get into it. And there was no one there to kind of support you, especially with all the old timers. They were all about doing it themselves and not wanting to share knowledge. And so I started From Field to Plate as a knowledge-based, kind of getting people from the field to the plate and everything that encompasses inside of that. And it's just exploded and grown in the past 4 years, from me sitting in a field in Wyoming by myself with a pocket knife to, taking new people out to Wyoming in that same exact area that I went out, 12 years ago. So,
yeah. That introduction theme has been a big one for you, I know, getting people started into hunting, and a lot of it via the vehicle, if you will, of cooking, which I know appealed to me greatly when I, first started getting into it, because I just really enjoy food, and I think a lot of people are that same way. And hunting can oftentimes just it's a means to get some really amazing meat that can then go into some pretty unique meals that otherwise they can still be good from, with meat that you get elsewhere, but it's never quite the same as when you really actually have your hand in just about every process of getting it to the table.
Yeah. And I think, even last year, it was almost exactly last year when I took out, a couple folks from your guys' headquarters and took them out hunting. And it's amazing to hear their stories of them cooking the food and how they've had wild game before, but when it was their wild game, when it was their deer, when it was their javelina, it was a completely different story because now they had a buy-in to it. It's sort of like I was telling everybody, it's that rich kid you knew at school where their parents bought them a car. And so they sped, they got in car accidents. They had no buy into that car at all because mom and dad bought it for them. Versus some of us where we saved up aren't all of our allowance and money to purchase a beater. And we were out there waxing that beater, even though, it had two different colored doors. And because it was ours, we took ownership in that. And I think when you actually go out and hunt your own meat, you take ownership in your dinner and you take ownership in the meals that's being made. And there's this buy-in that comes with everyone around you. It doesn't just become a mindless killing that people think hunters are. It becomes a means to feeding your family. I got in this big debate with this dude a couple of weeks ago because he was trying to convince me that Southern California did not have deer and didn't have ducks and didn't have quail and this dude lives in LA and was arguing with me that California doesn't have deer because he's never seen one. And I'm like, you've never gone farther than LA. He's never left the concrete jungle. He's 26 years old. And he got in this big argument. And I'm like, here's a picture of me with the Hollywood sign behind me and a deer that we shot. Like, he's like, it's photoshopped. I was like, all right. So there's this big argument in these ideas. They'll still go out. They'll still eat a hamburger. They'll still go get beef in the grocery store. But when we do it ourselves, they've never experienced that. And so taking a new adult hunter, out for the first time to experience that, it's way different than taking a kid. Because to a kid, it's an adventure. Oh, I get to go shoot a gun. I get to go shoot an animal. But when you take out an adult, it becomes a lifestyle. It becomes a core being of who they are that they want to go and teach and they want to go and be a part of it. So I love the people that take out kids. I take out tons of kids, but I love that 25 to 90-year-old range of adults, and it's really cool to see someone the first time pull the trigger and walk up on an animal and the emotions that go about it. And then taking it into the next step, which is, butchering it and eating it and creating meals. Like I would never, think about putting kimchi on a burger or a burrito, but
well,
someone's
it
mind
didn't win. So, I mean, it didn't get first place.
It got high praises. It got high praises.
I'm just, thinking of doing more of like a kimchi style dipping sauce to pour over it, almost like a wet burrito versus inside of it. So you can, but there's all these things is your brain goes there. When you add this wild game, it's your food, it's your wild game. And I think that's what really excited me. And that's what's thrust from Field to Plate forward in these past 4 years is it doesn't matter how old you are or where you live. If you don't eat, you die.
Yeah.
And so if we can teach people to eat better, and it doesn't have to be a $90 plate of food, you can go to the Walmart grocery store and get a pack of taco seasoning and make tacos for your family. It doesn't have to be fancy.
Yeah.
It can be cheap,
Did you come from a chef background of some sort, or what led you into creating some of the recipes that, if you follow Jeremiah on Instagram, from Field to Plate, you'll see some of the stuff that you've made. And I'm not going to say you don't make stuff for shock value. It's certainly not to that level. I mean, everything on there looks really incredible, but it's not the kind of thing that you traditionally see people making with, antelope, venison, whatever, from various different animals that you've harvested. It's you can tell there's that little bit of extra attention to detail, making it a little bit more special, a little bit more outstanding than instead of just kind of like, jerky and steaks.
Right. No, my family has always been, I'm Irish. And so there's always, as an Irish kid, it's always surrounded around food, right? Like, even though it might be bland food, it's still food that's being cooked. And so my mom was always in the kitchen. We grew up with tons of kids. And so we were always in the kitchen with that. My grandpa was always on the grill. My dad was always on the grill. So there's that kind of basics behind it, but it was never this. Growing up, I was a very creative kid with having a lot of siblings and not being into the same things that all the siblings were. They were all real big into sports and into cars and, doing all the, extreme sports. And I was that nerdy kid that was reading comic books and writing stories and listening to music. And so for me, I was big into art, big into writing stories. And so it was because I could create my own world and no one could tell me that I was wrong in my own world. Well, when I got into the restaurant business, I got in as corporate training and development because I wanted to develop, kind of look what I'm doing now. I'm training and developing people, but I would write training programs for servers, bartenders, back of the house. And I would see the passion that the chefs had and the cooks had for food. And so I would go in there and I'd start creating dishes, just things that were in my head. And then everyone would go crazy about it. And I'm like, it was just something that was in my head. And for me, cooking is that release. It's that creative outlet that used to be in the stories is no one can tell me what I cook is wrong. They can like it or they don't have to like it, but it's not wrong. And so for me, cooking became that kind of thrust into it where I just fell in love with creating something from nothing, taking 12 ingredients that shouldn't go together and creating a sauce that people are pouring over and drinking because of the flavor in it. And so if you can take wild game, which a lot of people say is gamey or earthy or whatever, and create a dish that your kids are craving to eat and people who are non-hunters want to go eat, that's that same me writing a book that people are reading and getting into my world. They're now getting into my head with a recipe. As little as it is making a stew. There's a million stew recipes out there. It's not going to be redone, but how can I take and not hide the wild game flavor, but enhance it into that stew? I think is the best kind of where my head goes when I cook and how I get into. But no, I've never been formally trained, and I've worked alongside some of the best chefs in America and Canada, and right there with them. And that's why I never called myself a chef at all. I was just a wild game cook, and they were like, no, you're a chef, because a chef is a master of their craft. So even though you're a bakery chef, you've mastered bakery. So you're a wild game chef because you've mastered. And so I started calling myself that based on them calling me that, because I still am like, no, I'm just a surf kid from California who likes to eat, and
Cool.
it shows.
I think that's a really good point, though, because you talk about kind of comfort levels where we as hunters, I think, will see a post on Instagram or a comment to someone who posted a photo of a deer they'd harvested. And in our minds, we expect that they understand everything surrounding that, the experience, why we do it, as you know, the food later. But for new people in particular, you're already asking them to take a huge jump in trying hunting itself. And I think there's really something to be said, and I don't want to generalize with people who don't hunt are more into certain types of food, but a lot of people make poppers. A lot of people will throw it in the crock pot and do a roast, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you're already asking these new people to take such a leap, and whether they're pulling the trigger or they're just on the hunt, like you don't want to end the experience there. You want to show them that there's something more there from a food aspect. So I think what you're doing and putting spins on recipes that might be something that they'd see at their favorite Chinese restaurant, or they really like this certain kind of Thai takeout. If they can see that kind of cross that divide and it can be done with wild game, I think it's so much easier to keep them interested in that activity just because they can relate to it. And they know that meat that they can take themselves, they can do all these crazy things with it. And there's no set book of this is how you have to do a shank, this is how you have to do a roast. There's just so much freedom, and it's such an unwritten rules, because like you said, breaking rules, doing whatever you want to do, no one has to tell you how a dish has to be made. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And when it comes to the food aspect, like you're saying, is there's so many different cultures. Looking at just you and I sitting here across the screen, the food that you find in Wisconsin is going to be completely different than the food you find in Southern California. Mm-hmm. Just based on, let's just say, Mexican food, Hispanic cooking. Your guys' Mexican food restaurants suck compared to the Mexican food restaurants that we have down here because of the culture that's surrounding it. Like there is a Hispanic culture that thrives, and their food is and we have all the spices. We have it, I'm an hour and a half from Mexico. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when someone looks at it like, well, I'm not as good as this because I live here and I can't get the spices. Make what you like, love what you like, and utilize it. Your version of kimchi might be different than my version of kimchi, but it's still kimchi. And you're talking about taking your favorite takeout. There's a story that I like to tell is I was taking out we had a bunch of youth that were going out here in California for pheasant hunting. What they do, as soon as the kids get their license, they can put in for what are called free youth hunts. And so as mentors, you go and you take them out and you let them free hunt pheasant, quail, duck, and you develop them as soon as they get their license, like it's their first official hunt. And so I'm out there with this dad and these two kids, like I think a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. And these boys had just got their hunting license. They were so excited to hunt. And we get up on it, the dog's on it, and I tell the kid, okay, come stand next to me. I'm going to make the dog flush the pheasant. When it rises, you're going to shoot it, right? And this 12-year-old. So he goes over there, he's standing there, dog jumps, bird flushes, boom, he shoots it, perfect shot, hits down the dog. He is so ecstatic. The dog runs over. I let him get it out of the dog's mouth. He is just, and the dad goes, and he goes, oh, I'm so excited to eat it. And the dad looks him square in the face and goes, we don't eat pheasant. They taste like crap. He took all that emotion that this 12-year-old had over his first kill. And he was so excited to eat it, so excited to try it, because him and I were talking about food the whole time. And then for the dad to just shut him down instantly, like I watched him just break. And I just I'm like, well, it's his family. I'm not going to get into it. Right. So then it was the 10-year-old's chance to shoot. And he goes, I don't want to shoot if we're not going to eat it. I don't just want to kill something. And the dad's like, get up there. I drove all the way out here. Blah, 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 right. And so I look at the dad. I'm like, hey, kind of come with me for a second. And I talk to the dad a little bit. And he's like, well, we don't eat this crap. We don't do this. So I walk over to the boys and I make them sit down in the field. Now, mind you, there's hunters all around us. I'm like, okay, tell me your favorite dish, like your favorite chicken meal you've ever had, because pheasant really resembles chicken, right? And so both boys are sitting there. They both start laughing. And I go, what? They're like, orange chicken from Panda-Express. Their favorite meal of all time of chicken is Panda-Express orange chicken. And I'm like, really? And they're like, oh yeah, we love it. Da, 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 da. And so I said, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an orange chicken style recipe that resembles Panda-Express as much as I can. And I'm going to email your dad, and you guys are going to sit down. You're going to cook it with him together. And you two are going to prove to your dad that he's wrong, that pheasant tastes incredible, that you can cook it. And so the dad's like, I go, can you just give me that? He goes, I'll give you that. Right. So the boys end up shooting. They end up getting all their birds. We go and we, skin 2 of them. We breast 2 of them. And then we pluck 2 of them. I'm like, these are the 3 different ways you can clean them. And I went home, and for 2 weeks, I ate like orange pheasant for like every single meal. My wife's like, if you cook it again, I swear I'm going to like leave you, because I was trying to develop this recipe so much for these kids. And I finally nailed one that to me was very, very similar and easy to create. Cause I could have went and made something that was super expensive, but this isn't I knew for a fact this family didn't have a lot of money. And so using oranges and soy and ginger and creating this dish, I emailed to the dad. The dad emails me 2 days later and says, I want to apologize. That was one of the best meals and best experiences we've ever had as a family. We sat in the kitchen and cooked. We laughed. We ate. Even mom ate it. And, all because of a fast food chain food that they could recreate with a pheasant. And it changed this dad's perspective. And these kids are now loving hunting with their dad. And it's not, hey, we're just going to go out and kill something. It's just orange chicken, an orange style pheasant. It's nothing fancy. It's not, pheasant under a glass where you're putting black truffle oil on, you're slicing it paper thin. It's literally, and it's still today one of my number 1 recipes on my blog, number 1 recipes on Pinterest. And it's just a basic, fast food orange chicken.
That's awesome.
And it's incredible that you think about, like, because you said it plain. It's, if you can change someone's mind through a plate, then let's change away and let's start changing this perspective, one bite at a time.
And I tell you, one of the things I get a little nervous about when I've got wild game in the freezer and I'm getting ready to try and fix something is I know I like steak. That's easy. Throw a little garlic, onion, and mushroom in a pan, make a steak in the juices. That tastes good every time. And then you go out and you're thinking like, well, I want to try something different. But you see something different out there, and it's a little bit, it's not what you've always had. And you think, there's kind of this finite amount of wild game that I've got on hand right now, and the next time I'm going to get to go hunting won't be for a while. And it gets a little nerve-wracking to try some of that stuff. And so I wind up just kind of, I'll just make a steak again because I know I like that, Where do you, how do you, maybe you just got to just get over it. And that's one thing in and of itself. But where do you recommend, how do you recommend people start kind of branching out a little bit? What's like a really good start to being a little bit more adventurous with the food?
You would actually be blown away that is like 90% of the hunters out there.
Yeah,
is is they tell me they don't want to ruin it. They don't want to waste their meat. They don't want to ruin it. So by trying a new recipe, you potentially are going to ruin that 4 cuts of ribeye, of your sirloin steaks that you had cut, or that roast that you had, because you might have only shot 1 deer that year. And that you love to have, Alabama roast where you put the peppers and all the stuff in there. And so by trying a different roast, you might ruin the only deer that you shot that year.
Mm-hmm.
And my biggest thing is you can't ruin it. You just know that you're not going to eat it next time. But I was actually talking to a guy yesterday on Instagram, and he goes, "Hey, I shot a bunch of goose here he was in Canada, and I really want to make a chili recipe, but I've never used goose for chili recipe, and I don't want to ruin the goose, and I want to." He starts going off. And he goes, "I have such an amazing venison chili recipe, but do you have any good goose recipes?" And so I wrote him back and said, "Tell me all about your venison chili." And so he wrote all the ingredients, and I copy and pasted, and I just took out venison and I put in goose, and I sent it right back to him. He goes, "What?" I go, "The biggest thing that I tell people is to find your family's favorite recipe and just sub it with wild game. Find, your mom makes an amazing pot roast. Take your mom's pot roast recipe and don't be afraid to throw in a roast. You have your favorite whatever, take the wild game substitute and create your favorite whatever. And you're going to be blown away that you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to use beef to make sloppy joes. But you're so used to making the beef sloppy joes, you're like, I don't want to ruin sloppy joes by having venison. Just do it. A lot of people are asking for recipes. Go on Pinterest and type in chili recipe. Sub out the meat for whatever you have in your fridge, and I'm telling you, it's going to blow your whole concept away for how to create wild game recipes. People think there's this wild game science, that we're all sitting here and I'm sitting there going, okay, this is the only way that wild game will taste if I do it this way. Meat is meat. When it comes down to it, and I pull meat out of the freezer, red meat is red meat, birds are birds, hogs are hogs. I've got 4 wild boar ribs in my sink right now that are going to be seasoned as soon as we're done with this, and they're going to go in the smoker. People say you can't eat wild boar ribs because they're thinner. It's all about taking the recipe and figuring out how it works. Now that's where I come in, is you sit there saying, well, hey, now that I have this goose, do I grind it? Do I stew it? That's where I'm going to come in and help you. But taking that favorite recipe and just asking the question of, how do I add this meat to this favorite recipe, I think is the real big difference maker, because people are so scared to try something new. But you'll eat that same ribeye steak with a peppercorn sauce that you make. You just won't sub venison because you don't know how it's going to taste. Try it once and just be excited to try it. And there's recipes that I make that I never make again. And I'll be honest with that. Even when we sit down at a table, we're all eating. My daughters and wife look at me. They're like, I was like, yeah, you're right. That was a horrible idea. Cross that out of the book and figure out how to fix it. And so I think when you look at stuff like that, it changes your perspective on it.
It's just such an interesting anecdote too, is people reaching out worried that they're going to ruin the meat. And I think that says a lot to the connection that people have with the animal that they harvest. Like, you don't hear people who buy ground beef at the supermarket and they get home and see a new recipe. They're like, oh, I just really don't want to ruin this. I'm super worried. It's like, no, if it's bad, they're going to dump it in the trash.
Yeah, because the grocery store is magic. You go there, there's ground beef today, there'll be ground beef there tomorrow.
Right. But it's just so interesting of that connection that people have, and it's like so special to them because they have so much time and effort invested into it. But it is a super good point that it is hard to convince people to get adventurous because there is that element of risk involved.
Well, even like yesterday, I posted, again, I don't understand why some posts blow up and some posts don't, because sometimes I take the time to create this amazing looking meal and I post it and it doesn't do anything. I'm like, really? That's beautiful. Then I post a picture of a bowl of meat with a bloody paper towel and it goes freaking ecstatic and gets shared 10,000 times. I'm like, it's a cell phone picture of a bloody paper towel. But it was the message behind the picture that really resonated with people, was how to get that gamey taste out of your meat that people don't like. And I always say that I don't force thaw, but I thaw all my meat in paper towel lined bowls, because meat is a sponge, right? And so as it starts to thaw, it's going to release a lot of the hemoglobins and the bloods and all the other things that are going to hold on to a lot of negative flavor, and they're going to seep out. But the problem is they suck right back into the meat as soon as it's fully thawed. By adding the paper towels down there, all that nastiness goes into this paper towels and doesn't soak back up into the meat. A lot. I was blown away that people were like, oh my gosh, I've never tried that. Or I soak it in water, but then it takes away all the flavor and it comes. There's little steps that people don't even know about that we think as hunters, everyone knows about, right? But when it gets shared 10,000 times and people are like, I've never heard of this. I'm going to go try this. I just pulled venison out. That's a little step to make your food taste better that people are, again, they're scared to mess it up. So grandpa taught me that I need to wrap it and then I need to force thaw it real quick because the faster I thaw it under hot water, then it's not going to have time to, then I got to soak it in buttermilk because I got to leach. That's what grandpa told him because grandpa did that because great grandpa did that. We're not using the same bows that our great grandpas used. We're not using the same optics that our great grandpa used. We're not using the same knives that our great grandpa used. So why are we using the same butchering processes and some of these processes that, cooking methods? Growing up, every wild game I ever had was rock hard because you had to kill the bacteria. We know now that we can eat wild game raw because there's a lack of bacteria that's formed in wild game. So there's this methods that have changed. I think it really comes down to cooking also is don't be afraid to go outside of the normal. And there's a reason that I do it. I'm not going to steer you wrong. You're not going to steer people wrong. If I'm like, hey, trust me, cook it to 125. No, I can't do. Just trust me, cook it to 120. And then I cooked it to 125. Javelina. How many people have you heard say javelina sucks to eat?
Oh, everybody.
And your teammates shot javelina in Texas and brought it in and everyone ate it. How did it taste?
I heard all thumbs up.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
It was incredible because of the butchering process and they understand how to do it.
In fact, we don't even know how it tasted because they didn't bring any back, I don't think. Or maybe they did. They just didn't tell us.
They brought one small plate for everyone. It was
like what they make like chorizo or something. What they make?
Oh yeah, no, that's right. Okay, they did tell us. But
they made chorizo.
It was one of those like, there's something out in the break room. Oh, sorry, it's already gone.
I know. Jason went pretty crazy with his stuff. He did a lot of really cool recipes at home too.
Yeah.
But
he texted me nonstop about this, and it was cool too to see him on that because he is a fairly newer hunter. He had only bird hunted. But to see the passion that he has, because he has a completely different palate than I do when it comes to food and his creativity that when it came to food, he was sending me pictures. I'm like, dude, I would have never thought to utilize that venison in that way, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And I think that's the best part about food is there is no wrong way to cook it. On one side of me, I have a Vietnamese family. On the other side of me, I have a family from Puerto Rico and I smell different foods all day long. I can't go over and tell them that theirs is wrong and theirs is wrong. When they're smelling my food, that's the best part about cooking is that there is, again, like I said, there's no wrong way to do it. And to not be afraid to mess up, I think is the biggest thing, and not maybe just take one small steak and try it, try to create that idea and that recipe. And so you're not ruining a whole roast. It's like create a flavor profile with that and try it and be like, oh, it's really good. I'm going to finish eating it. So,
and talking about getting new people involved too, the stakes are so high with those little important steps that you notice, like how you thaw your meat, how you prepare your meat, because the wind can blow that person on one side of the fence or the other. Like eating that food for the first time could make them a lifelong hunter, or they might have one negative experience and they're done for good. They had venison one time, they didn't like it, so now they're kind of turned off. I mean, think about same thing with people who try a new restaurant and they don't like it. More often than not, they're not going to go back.
Yep.
So it's just focusing on those important small steps to keep it simple and do it the right way, especially if it's someone that's new to the outdoors, new to wild game cooking, new to hunting, because realistically, you're only going to have one chance with a lot of those people.
Yeah, we got a friend who I think grew up having some of the rock hard, overcooked, underseasoned, probably improperly cared for all the way from the kill to the skillet or whatever it was. That was all she had for, I think, a while. Anytime she'd had venison, and now she's just like, I will not eat it. Not a chance. It's not even like, it's just beyond all repair at this point.
And that's
too bad.
And I find that more often than not with people. And it all stems from, like you said, that bad experience. And working I worked in the restaurant industry from 16 to 32. So a ton of years. And it's that old notion where if someone has a good experience, they might tell one person about their good experience. If someone has a bad experience, they're going to tell 10 to 15 people about their bad experience. And so the same thing goes with wild game, because I talk to so many people. They're like, No, I'm not going to eat it. It's gamey. Have you ever tried it? No, but my uncle's cousin's neighbor's friend told me that they had a bad venison. They've never tried it. Like we had a football party yesterday at my friend's house, and I made elk sliders and then wild boar bratwursts. We brought it over, and everyone that's had it before, now mind you, no one there hunts. They're all very Southern California, and they are like, they're like, oh my gosh, and they're all eating. And this one lady was like, I'm not gonna eat anything. It's wild. She's like, do you have any normal food, any real food? I go, what do you mean? She's like, well, like food that I would cook. And I go, well, you cook bratwurst. She's like, yeah. I go, so it's normal food. Well, no, I mean like normal food. And I go, have you ever tried it? She's like, well, no, because it's not normal. I was like, define normal. Like when did normal become grab and go wrapped in plastic and saran wrap? Like when did that become normal versus going out and using these and getting bloody and dirty for dinner? So I go, just try it. I have a rule. I've told a million people, if you don't like it, you can spit it in my hand. And I tell everybody that. If you don't like it, spit it in my hand and I will not be offended, but you have to try it. I've never had anyone spit anything in my hand yet, thank goodness. Especially with the Rona going around. Let me put on some gloves with the hand sanitizer. But I think, so I sat there and I go, just try it. So she grabbed a bratwurst. She smelled it. She's like, it smells like a normal bratwurst. I go, because it's a normal bratwurst. Meat is meat. She ate it. She went back for a second one. I go, now try an elk burger. She's like, I'm not going to try it. Her husband's like, so she takes a little piece. She's like, well, it tastes like meat. And I was like, because it's meat. Next thing you know, she's having sliders. She's talking to her husband. Why don't you go out and shoot an elk? And did it right. She was anti until you had this notion of food. I was teaching a class and there was a husband brought his wife. His wife was a vegetarian. And she came to this class through Traeger because she wanted to learn how to cook wild game because her husband went out and shot a lot of wild game and made her cook it because he wasn't a cook. And she hated cooking it. She hated smelling it. She hated this. She hated that. She hated this, and he wanted her to cook it like 3 ways, like chili, wrapped in bacon, or like jerky. That's all he wanted her to cook it.
The Holy Trinity.
Yes, exactly.
And she hated doing it. And she was like, oh my gosh. So she came to the class and I did, I think 5 recipes at Traeger headquarters last year. And I'm watching her sitting there and everyone else is trying samples, right? And they're like, oh, it's so good, so good. And I was like, well, let me tell you the story behind that recipe. Let me tell you the story behind why that flavor profile is. Let me tell you the person who inspired this. And so all of a sudden I saw her pick something up and eat it, right? And I'm like, I didn't think anything of it because I knew nothing about this lady. I'm just up in the front of the class talking to her. Afterwards, she comes over. She's like, I have to be honest with you. She's like, I've been a vegetarian for 15 years. She's like, your food and your meat was absolutely incredible. And I went, what? And she goes, and her husband's like, she was blown away. She goes, what got me into trying it was hearing everybody else get excited about it, but then hearing your story behind every single recipe that you made. She goes, I had to try the story. I had to be part of that memory. I had to be part of that, now her and I are actually really good friends because she's like, okay, my husband just shot an elk and I want to cook it this way. And she's eating wild game. She still will not eat anything domestic, but she's eating wild game with her husband. And her husband's texting me going, man, her cooking's incredible. All because of a story that was told and all because of an idea behind dinner. Like she was like, oh my gosh, you invented that because of a little girl that was upset because of this. Well, I got to try it. And I think that's where the fear comes in is people are afraid to even try it because of a misconceived idea. That's why I hate the word gamey, because gamey is an automatic negative term for a flavor profile that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It is like people talk about guns. I mean, you and I are in the gun industry, and there's a negative notion when someone talks about an assault rifle, right?
Right.
Now we know that assault rifle is a made up term. And nothing's really an assault rifle, or an extended magazine. My shotgun that holds 3 shells is considered an extended mag. But once we teach them and once we show them the negative aspect goes away, especially in gamey flavored food, people are amped to just eat everything. Once they try a deer that was cooked properly, they'll try a boar, they'll try elk because it automatically changes their mind. Wait, this isn't that gamey, flavor venison that my dad overcooked and put Lowry's seasoning salt on. This actually has flavor and depth, and I can chew it and it melts. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think changing that misconception is the biggest part of.
So you'd mentioned like 390 people you've taken on a hunt. I think, Jeremiah, if you had to ballpark it, how many of those people was food the main driver for them being interested in going out and hunting with you?
387. I mean, I'm not even,
Mm-hmm.
it's night. I even take out people who are like, this guy came to a class last year, has traveled the world hunting $1 million animals, right? This dude dropped $150,000 to shoot an elephant in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
He came and took my little $3,000 class because he felt bad that he doesn't eat wild game. Hearing this dude's story about and seeing the videos and animals that he's hunted, he loves to hunt, but he grew up not eating it because of he hated the taste. So he comes to the class and hunting along people who are first-time hunters. Like there was one lady that was in her 70s and her grandson wanted to get into hunting, but there was no one in her family that hunted. And so she's like, well, I want to get my grandson into it. She's like, but I don't want to just get my grandson in. I want to get my grandson into the whole experience of cooking and butchering. And since there's no one he could take it to, I want to teach him. 70-year-old grandma comes out to hunt to teach her grandson, who's 18, how to hunt. Like mind blown, right? And this dude's sitting there and he's talking about all these animals he's killed. And I was like, well, why are you at, no offense, why are you at my class? Because usually my class is first-time hunters or people who are in hunting but don't really know what to do. And he goes, because I hate wild game food and I want to learn to love it. And so sitting in a blind with this dude talking about his stories and then going back and cooking a steak and him eating a steak. And he goes, okay, I'm only going to cook that steak. I was like, no, there's like 7 more dishes we're going to be cooking. But he spent all this time and effort because he wanted the food. Even though he can go travel the world and go shoot another zebra if he wants, or he's coming to South Texas, shooting a $3,000 deer to learn how to butcher it himself and cook it himself. To me, that screams louder than any other thing. You know, I had a couple they were married and the husband was a hunter and the wife wasn't. The wife wasn't because her dad forced her to shoot a squirrel when she was like 7 years old. And it ruined her whole thought process on hunting. I'm evil and violent. Her dad literally made her shoot a squirrel. And then she comes out to the class and I sat in a blind with her for a couple of days. And I'm like, I'm not your dad. I don't care if you shoot anything. Like, let's just watch the animals. And then she ended up harvesting and she ended up, butchering. And now she's like obsessed with it. Like she is like hunting more than her husband because of the food. And she's sending me these recipes. And I'm like, I would have never thought to do that with wild game.
That's cool.
And so, but I don't know. There's something really spiritual and huge about taking an adult out and changing their perspective on their family or food or culture with sitting in a deer. I always tell people there's no more intimate spot than a honeymoon or a deer blind because you're forced to get to know that person intimately. When you go on a honeymoon, it's like, oh, it's just you and I now. We're married. What do we do? When you're sitting in a deer blind, it's like, hey, it's just you and I don't know you. We have to talk. And it becomes this spot that's very intimate and it's very therapeutic when you're sitting in a deer blind talking to people. Even with a camera guy behind you, you still for some reason you're bonded over that moment for life. So,
and a lot of people listening to this too, I feel like they're going to be able to relate to the idea that even if you're hardcore into hunting, your core friend group's hardcore into hunting, there's going to be people in your circle of friends that are against it, don't like it, don't understand it. Is there some type of like playbook that you follow, or what would you say are kind of the most common misconceptions or questions that you get at these classes, Jeremiah?
A lot of the misconceptions are people, all of them watch hunting programming or they see it on TV or they see it on social media and they see this big rough and tough dude or a very, beautiful looking woman. And it's all surrounded about that kill shot. It's an hour-long program of pulling the trigger, of pursuing this game, pulling the trigger. And then it's the final, here's the horns. And so a lot of people, that is their perspective on hunters. That is it's sad to say, but that's our culture. Even look at Jim Shockey. I mean, a lot of his programs, he's an amazing hunter, end with him holding up a critter for a final shot and then telling the story. Even Steve Ranella going through some of his stuff, sometimes those episodes are all geared towards getting that goat, climbing the mountain to get that goat. I got to get that goat. I got to get that goat. And then it's like, okay, now here's a little stake on the thing. Where for me, it's like, I could care less about getting that goat. Now that I've got the goat, this is where, to me, the most passion starts. And I get made fun of a lot by a lot of hunters because I tell them that my favorite part of it is as soon as the trigger's been pulled and everything afterward, because I really enjoy the gutting process. I really enjoy the butchering process. I really enjoy the thought process and sitting in blinds. And I'll talk to new people. I said, okay, what's your thought going through your head before you pull the trigger? Am I going to make a good shot? That's the biggest thing, is like, I don't want the animal to suffer. And so teaching them and coaching them where to place that shot, and, telling them that, I have people that come, they want to bring their own rifle, and they're shooting, a scope they got at Walmart that's made for a BB gun on a 30-06. Well, if you want to make a proper good shot, you can't be using a $30 scope on that rifle, because it's made for a BB gun. It's not made for the percussion. And so teaching them every aspect of a hunt, all the way down to your optics and the knives you use. When I first shot my very first antelope, I went out there with a Swiss Army knife that I got from when I was 13, for Christmas. And that thing had never been sharpened. It was one of the ones that you could put like a corkscrew, a toothpick, a spoon. And I'm trying to gut and skin this animal for my very first time as an adult with this little Swiss Army knife that's like that thick. And I'm like, this sucks. Like, hunting sucks. I'm a bird hunter. Screw it. If it flies, it dies. I know how to pluck. I know how to gut. I know how to shoot it. I can shoot a shotgun all day long. This sucks. And I remember telling myself, like, I got to figure this out. And I went and got my first good knife. And I was like, oh, this is how you do it. And then taking new people out and teaching them, oh, that's how you do it. Because a lot of people, I had a guy that came over yesterday and borrowed a whole set of knives because he's heading to Texas to shoot whitetail. He's like, you have any knives I can borrow? I'm like, yep, here, Merry Christmas. This whole set's yours. Take it and keep it. What? I go, just take it. But he was scared to do it because he's afraid to mess up. So I literally sat there and drew diagrams. This is where you make your first cut. This is how you go up. This is how you spread this. This is how you take out this. Just drew it on a piece of paper. He's like, oh, I feel so much more confident. And he walked away. Like, people just need that. They need someone to come alongside them and not tell them what to do, but to show them what to do. Because I think so often in life, we're told you have to do this. You have to. There's no right way or wrong way to skin a deer. A deer is going to get skinned no matter how you skin it. If it comes off in strips or if it comes off with a golf ball, there's better and easier ways to do it. There's no wrong way. There's no wrong way to butcher your deer. There's better and easier ways to do it, but there's no wrong way. As long as you get all the meat off and you eat it, I could care less. But being confident enough to try it and not mess up. And if you do mess up, be confident in yourself that I'm not going to do that next time.
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, I think sometimes in our lifestyle that we have here, we don't always do ourselves enough favors in that, you show, a lot of times when you see people out there in the field and they show, okay, I got to get that XYZ, and there's a lot leading up to it on the hunt or whatever, and then they pull the trigger and then it's sort of done. They're like, look what I got. If most of the time, I'm not going to say every single time, but most of the time, if you actually were to then follow that person after the camera's turned off, they would take, they'd butcher it out, they'd take it home, they'd get the meat out, they'd freeze it, they'd cook it, they'd do all that stuff, but they don't always tell that story, because I think the assumption is usually that a bunch of people who all know that behind the scenes are the ones watching. And so those people don't need to see all those details. But then when you have the newer crowd, there are a lot of details that just, I think, sometimes get taken for granted, that don't get pointed out, that sometimes the newer people are left scratching their heads like, well, what's going to happen with that? Or how did you guys get from here to there? And that's usually the stuff that I think keeps people out, because they're kind of like, well, I clearly am missing something,
Right.
And Jeremiah.
No, and go for it.
Oh, sorry. Have you seen that people that are absolutely brand new to hunting that come into your class are more likely and more comfortable asking questions, and even like stupid questions, than the people who are semi-familiar with it?
Oh, 100%. And and I always tell people, that whole, there's no dumb question. There's only questions that aren't asked. And for that husband and wife that came that I was telling you about, the husband's an adamant hunter, bow hunts, does all that stuff, right? And so literally when he came to the class the first day, he was like, hey, I'm just gonna let you know, I'm here for my wife. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not really going to care. Like I'm here for her. I'm here to support her. After the first day, he was like, okay, so you cut it there? That's how you cut it? Right. And because his wife was asking questions and he was kind of sitting back, and finally he's like, okay, but how do I do? So I've been doing this wrong. because all of a sudden he realized that all these other people that were asking questions were questions that he's never asked. He's just assumed, you know. But and I even say that taking out new hunters, they're much more respectful to every single ounce of that animal. You take out a veteran hunter, like let's just say I take you out, you've shot a lot of deer, you're going to butcher down the deer and leave a lot of meat because you don't care. You're getting off your chunks. You're used to that. You're used to taking off the back quarters, the back straps, the tenderloins, the shoulders, maybe halfway up the neck, but you're going to like, I don't want to skin the neck all the way, so I'm just going to take that much of the neck, right? Taking out a new hunter, they're sitting there scraping every ounce of meat off of every single bone. Like it looks like a museum quality piece when they're done, because that's their animal. That's their first animal. And from that point on, they're now going to be teaching everybody and showing everybody that, you know, one lady took all the fat off all the deer. Cause I was telling her, I said, this is a very waxy fat. It's a very tallowy fat. We don't eat this fat. It holds negative flavor, blah, blah, blah. You can wax your boots with it. She took all the fat when we were at camp. She rendered it out. She made candles, deer fat candles for every single person. She's like, I can't let this fat go to waste. It has to be used for something. And I'm like, this chick just went home, took all the fat, rendered it down, made candles, put like peppermint scented. So I actually have a deer peppermint scented candle that she made from the fat that I would have just thrown in the gut pile because I'm like, that's fat. We don't need it. But for her, that part of the animal still needed to be respected. And that's what I see with new hunters. That's what I see all over the board with people. And I hear a lot of people too, they're like, hey, I talked to so-and-so and they're like, oh, I don't eat that. I don't use that. You know, I took out this guy named Darren, who's local California. He's in his late 40s, got into hunting exactly 1 year ago, called me up, he's like, hey, I want to learn how to hunt. So he bought a rifle, got his hunting license. He's an engineer for Boeing. So he's super brilliant, smart. And he wanted to get into hunting. His daughters moved out. They're in college. His wife does other things. And so money's not an option. He bought the best of the best. He's like, just tell me what I need to buy. I'm like, this is the gun. This is the scope. Boom, sold off, bought it, right? Took him out hunting in Wyoming. He did absolutely incredible. Well, 2 weeks ago, deer season opened up here in California. He went out by himself in an area in San Diego Mountains where they sell 3,000 tags with a 0.1% success rate on harvested bucks. And he went in, drove in farther than he could drive in than anybody else, hiked in farther than anybody else could, pulled the trigger on a legal buck by himself, remembered all the steps that I had taught him, caped it out, quartered it out, made 2 treks back and forth to get all the meat out by himself, and then calls me almost in tears because of what he had done. And so excited. He goes to the ranger station to get his deer checked. And they're like, oh, he's like, this is my very first solo hunt I've ever done. And they start getting ecstatic because to me, that's what it's all about, is a guy who gets so passionate and gets success because he pushes harder and faster and further than anybody else wants to. And I told him, I said, I was in tears because I felt like a proud dad, even though he's older than me, even though he's someone that I look up to and how he raises his daughters. At that moment when he's calling me, showing me what he did, it's like your kid coming home with a painting they painted at school. Put this on the fridge. Put this on the fridge. And I was like, oh my gosh, Darren, you did it. And then all these people in Southern California are like, I've been hunting there for 27 years. I've never even seen a legal buck. Well, because they drive in, they hike in a mile, like, there's no bucks here, and they leave. And so I think that is what it's all about, is getting that guy excited to get. And he's calling me on Skype. Okay, is this how I remove the silver skin? Yep. Okay, great. 10 minutes later, okay, is this how I remove this nut? Yep. Okay, great. 5 minutes later, hey, is this how that's what it's all about. I'll sit there for hours and hours and doing it. And I think if he's almost 50 years old and can do that, then there's no excuse for anybody else, because he was born and raised in Southern California and he's getting out there and pursuing his dinner in the hardest area to hunt. So people that are like, it's not for me, it's too hard. Bull crap. That's just this fast world telling you stories. It's easier to go to McDonald's and pick out a hamburger than it is to go get it. But I tell you what, it's a way more rewarding making a Big Mac at home than it is getting a Big Mac at McDonald's. So,
And the reason I'd ask that original question, Jeremiah, too, is because, I mean, this is purely my opinion, but if you think about the hunter that is like your average, pretty good at it, can do it safely, is not going to seriously mess anything up, that's the majority of your hunters. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you've got your expert level and you've got your complete novice, but you have this huge group of people in the middle. So if you can get those people to try new things, and just like that guy did with his wife, be comfortable asking questions, whether that's being wrong or just learning something new. Like, I think that is the key segment of that larger hunting population, because they have the reach that we need.
Right. I think the problem that we find too is that when they do ask questions, a lot of the expert hunters come at them with a negative response. You should know that. You should be a part of that. Some of these organizations and companies out there who promote hunting don't want to promote answering questions unless it's conducive to their company.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it all the time. And I get so many direct messages. They're like, hey, so I've reached out to this celebrity, this celebrity, this celebrity, this celebrity. I know you're probably not going to answer me, but my question is blank. And when I respond back, they're like, oh my gosh. And then all of a sudden it's just a floodgate of questions that come out. And I think that's the problem, is that a lot of who people are looking up to as those expert hunters don't care about the next generation, or even the generation that's standing beside them. They're solely focused on the likes, the clicks, and it's sad. It really, really is sad. And I've talked to different, mainstream hunters out there. I'm not going to name any names. And they're like, yeah, I get direct messages. I just delete them. I don't have time to answer questions. I'm too busy. Like, for me, answering a question is probably my favorite part of social media, is because that person took the time to ask you a question, and you can't give them the time back to answer a response. Even if it's hey, I don't know, I'll look into it, or hey, here's a link to this blog. You don't have to answer the question. But so many people so people then get scared to ask a question because they get shot down, or they feel that their question is stupid. Hey, I've been a lifelong hunter in Alabama, but I didn't know that you could do this. I don't want to ask because all my friends might see me post that on there, and then they're going to make fun of me because I don't know how to skin a deer properly. I don't know how to cape out a head if I want to do, a shoulder mount. I'm not going to ask that question because I'm going to get made fun of because they all know how to do it. The thing is they probably don't know how to do it either, but they're also scared that you're going to make fun of them. So just ask the question, get made fun of. It's like that kid in class that raises their hand and asks a question. All the kids make fun of them, but then they all write down the answer. It's don't be afraid to ask it. And if you are afraid, just direct message it and we'll do it. And I did a podcast. We did a live question and answer on Instagram last Monday. And I was blown away at the people that came on. We had 7,000 people following live on Instagram asking questions. And some were completely stupid, off the wall hunting questions that most people look at going, that's the dumbest question ever. But we took the time to answer it because it was important to Debbie 6337 Cocoa Puff or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
She felt it was important to her. And I think that's where we find a lot of problems. I think that's why for you guys doing those stupid little cooking videos in your pizza oven, it gets people excited to know that they don't have to be perfect, and I love watching all those because I think that's, hey, look, it's a dirty, nasty pizza oven and we're still cooking lunch in it. Like, it's not perfect, but we're going to eat it. We're going to enjoy it. And I think that's when it comes to questions, is it may not be the perfect question, but ask it, because you don't want to be afraid to do it wrong. And if you're going to do it wrong if you don't ask a question.
It's been a minute since the old dirty pizza oven has breathed fire, but sometimes you got to take a little hiatus.
A little breaker.
Yeah. But I think, well, both luckily and unluckily. Luckily because it means we're not the only ones, but unluckily because it means pretty much everyone does this. The hunting industry is the only industry like that. I mean, everybody is, you get so many people out there where, knowledge is power. It makes people feel special, especially when they're on the forums or wherever they're at, and so any way you can make other people feel dumb and make you look really smart, like everything. But it's like anybody who ever acts like a know-it-all and makes fun of other people for not knowing anything, it's, in my head, I mean, it's the dumbest argument you can ever make, or the dumbest thing you can ever poke fun at somebody for, because it's like, well, okay, since when has somebody popped out of the womb an expert on anything, So it's just, everybody learns something from everywhere. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. Even the guy who invented, the microwave oven still had to use electricity first, so somebody had to invent that first, and he had to. Everything is based off of stuff that's already existed. So nobody's out there creating anything from just nothing. So that's just kind of that people are funny that way. But anyway, we've got at the time of this releasing, it'll be right around the beginning of December. So hello, December, everybody, future us. And I know you've got some stuff that's going to be dropping on some of our social channels. There are going to be some recipes around holiday meals and whatnot. Obviously, the holidays bring in plenty of good food, and throwing in some wild game in there certainly can't hurt. It's right in the right time of year because hopefully people are filling their fridges and freezers. But what exciting stuff do people have to look forward to? What do you look forward to most when the holidays come around? Cooking wise, all that good stuff.
I think for me, it's trying the traditional recipes with a wild flair and getting people excited to do that. And this year it's going to be a little tougher because a lot of the parties are canceled, due to COVID. So I think for me, like I said, it's exciting because I usually make 100 pounds of venison summer sausage. And that's like the big gift. And everyone's always looking forward to it every single year. People that don't hunt, they're like, I had a text lady. She's like, am I going to get my summer sausage this year? I was like, yep, trust me, you're going to get it. So for me, it's taking those staples that you have this time of year, like your stews, your pot pies, your roasts, your turkeys, and understanding that you can recreate that dish with a wild flair, and you can recreate it with different flavors and profiles, and not being afraid to bring that to a party, not being afraid to let people try it. And then at the end go, oh, by the way, you just ate bobcat. Like, it's just one of those deals that, you guys ate bobcat jerky. I think I brought it for you guys to try. And it's one of those deals that if you're afraid to do it, like we've been talking this the whole time, I think fear is that biggest factor when it comes to wild game cooking is to do it. I know one of the recipes I have coming out is like a leftover. I'm also using unconventional cuts that you would use, so for the stew recipe, it's using shoulder meat, taking that shoulder, breaking it down for stew meat instead of being afraid to understand each cut on there. Just break it down, chop it up. Don't worry about ruining it. Take all the meat off and throw it in a stew. Like, you don't have to worry about the proper cuts and taking up, just get it off. Taking shanks. I think one of the recipes that we have is how to do a proper shank, doing that leftover, turkey and dumplings. So how to take over your thing, even if it's not wild, taking that leftover bird and make it into something that's completely different than just sandwiches and that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
there's a lot of cool things that we can look forward to in the holidays. And for me, I like it because I love making soups and stews. And being in Southern California, when it's 180 degrees in July, you're not wanting to make a soup and a stew. And so for me, that fall weather means a whole different, I don't get to sit outside and eat steaks anymore. I got to really start developing all the different crock pot style dishes that most, on Pinterest, 90% of my followers are women on Pinterest. Go figure. And they all ask, can we have a slow cooker recipe? Can we have an Instapot recipe? Can we have a, Ninja fryer, air fryer recipe? And so for me, it becomes exciting because I get to start helping these moms create meals for their families. And it's not all about the dudes on the barbecues anymore. It's about the moms and the seasonal dishes, and creating a crock pot dish that will get their family excited to go out and do it. And eventually, hopefully that mom will go out and want to get more meat because she realizes they're out of meat. So that's where I get excited. It's a whole different clientele. It's like, the chicks that start putting on sweaters and drinking pumpkin spice lattes in October, they're the ones that are going to start cooking all these fall recipes. So it becomes a whole new clientele, which is fun.
Tell you what, we talked earlier about people not wanting to ruin, quote, ruin their venison by trying something new and not liking it. You roll into the holidays, there's a lot of pressure around the food that you're making. But as I was thinking about it, I was like, you definitely don't want to ruin Christmas dinner or whatever. But, sometimes the holidays you could use a little excitement, So you step out on a limb, maybe you do it wrong, doesn't turn out the way you wanted it. You got a good story at least. I'm sure everybody get a kick out of it at the end.
Just blame it on your spouse.
Yeah. Then order in some Chinese food, and everybody has a good time anyway. So or whatever. But there's really, if you think about it, if you're trying to cook something and you want to try something different, but you're worried you're going to ruin Christmas or you're going to ruin, whatever celebration you're having, mean, it's like I feel like you're not going to ruin it because at the end, it's just like if your family's around you. Which I mean, I don't know. Hopefully, people can have their families around them this year, But if you, there's other ways to have a good time, And so it's people put way too much pressure on themselves sometimes, and kind of just have fun with it.
I think the only way you're going to ruin it is by not trying it.
Yeah.
To be completely honest, and that's I know it sounds cliche, but don't add a lot of salt. It's the biggest complaint people have with wild game is that they soak it in salt water because they think that's going to take out that wild gamey flavor we were talking about, and they season it, and then they season it. You'd be blown away how many people are like, oh, I just soaked my venison roast in salt water for 24 hours.
I've truthfully never even heard of that one.
Oh, go look at the blog, the Instagram post, and just read how many people I soak it in salt water, which is a huge thing because but like I told them, I said, again, meat is a sponge, so it soaks out, but then guess what? Then you soak all that nasty salt water all back into your meat. But then they season it with salt. And so people are like, this wild game is salty. Step 2, don't overcook it. If you're cooking something and you're going to bring it somewhere, cook it at a little less temp because it's going to continue cooking as you get there. And you still want to be moist. You still want to be flavorful. So if you're cooking it to 160 degrees, taking it to somewhere it's going to be 175, it might be overcooked. Or better yet, just make Christmas tamales. That's what we do here in California. And you just slow cook down all your meat. You never have to worry about it being overcooked. Tamales might seem intimidating, but they're probably one of the easiest things in the world to make. And then you just bring those tamales and everyone's like, oh my gosh, Christmas tamales. And then they eat it and they don't realize that you just mixed antelope, deer, elk. Usually I call it my leftover freezer tamales. It's whatever random cuts I have left in the freezer. I'm like, okay, all you going into a stock pot, all these chilies, all these peppers, break it all down because when it shreds, and then make these tamales. And everyone's like, oh, these tamales are amazing. It's like, and
which one's the tamale again? Asking as a born and raised Wisconsinite here. Which one's that? The only one I know is a burrito and a taco. And I tell you what, I like both of those.
So a tamale is in a masa, which is like a cornmeal paste, and then it's in the corn. It's in like a corn husk.
Okay.
So you kind of like unfold it, and it's got that little, almost like a little cake style.
Okay.
And then inside it's packed full of meat, and then you kind of cut into it. It's got meat.
Google
it. You like it.
Okay,
tamales,
I've seen these before. I just couldn't put a name to the site, but all right.
They are delicious.
Oh, they're phenomenal.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever actually had one.
They're good.
And so so a lot of guys ask me all the time, like, hey, what do I do with the neck? What do I do with the shoulder? Right? Because everyone knows what to do with all the back steaks. Everyone knows what to do with the back strap, tenderloins. When it comes to shoulders and neck roast, people are always like, and I always tell them, take it and break it down. Take that whole neck, throw it in a pot, break that whole thing down to shred it. And now you've got this whole 4 pounds, 5 pounds of shredded meat. That shredded meat is great for tacos. It's great for stews. It's great for tamales. It's great for salads. It's great for a plethora of other things because you broke it. It doesn't have to be a recipe. It could be that whole neck is broken down for recipes, plural. Same thing for the shoulder. Think about you taking if you're making pulled pork, you're taking the shoulder of a hog. Take that whole shoulder of a deer, throw it in a slow cooker in a stock pot, break it down till all the meat falls off the bones. And again, you've got that same shredded meat that you can use for all these different ingredients. And that's your best for tamales is that neck and that shoulder. We were in Laredo, Texas, and there was this housekeeper that came and cleaned in between the two classes. It was just this amazing little Hispanic lady. Her name was called Abuelita, grandma. And so
doesn't that mean she's pretty? No. Boring?
That's bonita.
Boring?
Is pretty.
Isn't Abuelita boring?
Abuelita, that's what she said. That's her name for grandma.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
She was everyone's grandma.
Jeez. Hey, there's my stupid questions for the podcast. What's a tamale and what the heck does that?
So is she an ugly tamale? Is that what you're saying? But she was like, when her other butchering deer, she comes over, hey, the neck roast para mí, okay? I was like, yeah, sure. So I gave her the neck roast, and she brought back some of the best tamales I've ever had in my life. And that's what started getting me this thought process of like, dude, I can just use that whole neck meat for that tamales. And for her, she was excited because she got to take that huge neck roast that people were throwing away, and she made amazing tamales. And so then I, of course, got her recipe. I'm like, give me your recipe. And it's funny because she didn't want to give me her tamale recipe and how to make her homemade tortillas because they were a family recipe. Then I made onion rings. Okay. For one of the classes, they wanted onion rings. She'd never had an onion ring. So she wanted my onion ring recipe in exchange for her tamale recipe, which I was laughing because I'm like, it's just beer battered onion rings. Like, but she was so excited for that. She's like, and then the next day she was making breakfast. There was onion rings out for breakfast, and I was like, all right, whatever.
That is okay.
I was like, so I took an onion ring, put it there, cracked an egg inside of it, and made like a little egg in a hole with an onion ring. It was phenomenal. But I ended up getting her tamale recipe because she got my onion ring recipe. So I thought it was kind of cool and fun. But it's kind of that random thing. You're like, it's just an onion ring. But she had never seen it, never tasted it. And she was like, I got to have that. So, but yeah, tamales are amazing. Using that neck and that shoulder for holiday type dishes. Thinking about all your seasonal stews.
Yeah,
that neck and shoulder is what you're going to be using for those seasonal stews. Don't waste your rump on a stew. Use that slow cooked meat for the stews and stuff like that. So
good deal.
Just to close out the holiday thing too, what a great opportunity to show up your great aunt that brings cocktail wieners. Everyone's got that aunt, right?
Cocktail wieners and barbecue sauce.
It's like every Christmas you see walking through with the crock pot, and they're delicious. Don't get me wrong.
I was about to say, I mean, I'm not
they're
usually
good.
mad about them.
They're good. But man,
she just takes sweet baby Ray's, pours it in there with the wieners,
grape jelly usually.
Yep. Oh yeah, throw some jelly in.
Yep. But
they're usually the aunt that shows up with a crock pot that looks like it's got a mosaic on the outside of it. Right, it looks like a doily. Like they just
they dust that thing off once a year, and that's for Christmas Eve party. But what an
name's
opportunity!
Always Aunt Nancy.
Yeah, to just do something new. Like even if people don't necessarily love it, like we were talking about earlier, just try something new. Maybe everyone else wants a break from cocktail wieners too, and just won't tell Nancy because it's uncomfortable. Like,
I get kind of sick. I got to be honest. I get kind of sick of just the same holiday. Like everybody always talk, oh, I love the holidays when they come up or whatever, and then the holiday meal is so great. I think the only great really thing about the holiday meal is that everybody's sitting down for dinner together. But it's probably like the one time a year it happens, basically. But that's like the great part of it. But otherwise, you just eat a bunch of like dry turkey and cranberry salad, which I don't even really love that much, and it's just.
Did you say cranberry salad?
Yeah. I don't even know how to explain
there's the jelly, and then some people make like the dressing salad. There's two. One like you open the can and then you put it upside down and it like
I've seen that.
Slinkies out.
Cranberry
What's
salad
the other one?
Is like
is that a Wisconsin thing?
Yeah, it's like cranberry. It's kind of a jelly-y consistency, but there's also nuts and celery in it.
What?
And I don't know. At least it's the stuff that I've had. Is this ringing a bell for you?
I haven't had it with celery, but
I'm gonna go Google this because I've never even heard of this.
Celery pieces in it, and then what else? Some sort of a white thing. I can't remember if it's like sour cream or what cottage cheese, or if it's
cheese curds.
It's weird. Oh yeah, the cheese. Yeah.
No, but I think that's the best part about like you're saying is being able to introduce something new. And last year for our family Christmas, we always get together and do a theme. Every year it's a different theme. It's like one year it's Mexican food, one year it's Chinese food, one year it's whatever. And so everyone's always looking forward. But last year we did soups and stews. Everyone brought a different soup and a different stew. And I brought a Hatch chili rabbit stew. It was incredible. And it's funny because a lot of I'm the only sibling that hunts. My brother might sometimes. My older sister just got her hunting license, which is crazy because she's in her 40s. And so she got her hunting license, which I'm excited about. But everyone's always kind of like nervous, which is funny. They're always nervous to try my cooking because, again, we grew up not eating it. We grew up not doing it. Even though I do this for a living and they all see my recipes and they all love it, they're always like, maybe I'll try a little bite. But that rabbit stew was like completely gone. And it was one of those deals where it was just like a chicken tortilla style soup, but with pulled rabbit. You could do the same thing with squirrel. Bringing it and letting people try it and then telling them what it is afterward always works. It's sort of that ask for forgiveness, not permission type deal.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, that was so good. Yeah, that was squirrel. Oh, I don't eat squirrel. Well, you just did.
Too late.
Too late. It was delicious, wasn't it? So I think, don't be afraid to try it new. Try something new, and don't be afraid to, if you don't see something on my page or someone else's, go to Pinterest and type in like, if you have squirrel, chicken dishes, holiday chicken dishes, or holiday chicken soups or stews, sub out your squirrel for that. It has the same consistency, flavor profile as a chicken. So don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to reach out to us and ask us like, hey, how do I cook goose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like there was that one guy was talking about goose, and he sat there and was like, yeah, I really want to make a stew with this. And I said, okay, I make a goose and barley stew. So taking that pearl barley, putting cans of beer in there, cooking it down. It's an incredible stew, and it's got these big old pearl barley in there, and it has that kind of hobby flavor as of a beer, but you're eating it with this big chunks of stew and, you know, of goose meat and all the herbs and vegetables. And so it may not sound conventional, but when you eat it, the flavors remind you of a conventional meal. So finding those flavors and not being afraid to add some nutmeg and some allspice to a dish that you're making and make it taste holiday-y, I guess. But yeah.
Sounds awesome. I'm also glad to hear confirmation of the fact that squirrel does have a very chickeny consistency. Because every time I try and explain that to somebody and they're like, what does squirrel taste like? I'm like, chicken. And they just don't believe it.
Yeah, no, it's most, which we'll see, but that begs the question. Does everything taste like chicken, or does chicken taste like everything else?
Yeah,
and I think
that's a good question.
Deep thoughts there.
Those are the ones you're sitting on the...
Why are the deep thoughts always revolving around chickens? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Does chicken taste like everything? Or does
I always tell everybody,
taste like chicken?
Why the chicken cross the road?
The egg can't incubate itself, so...
Well, you heard it.
You bring up a good point.
You heard it here first.
So, and the chicken crossed the road because KFC was on one side. That's what my grandpa used to always tell us. He crossed it because KFC was on the one side. But you guys have KFC out there, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I don't know what's out there.
The Colonel makes it this far north.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I don't know if you guys had some crazy, like, different chicken style restaurant up there. Church's Chicken or something like that.
We got Chick-fil-A now, so.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
Yep.
You guys got stoplights yet, or?
No.
Still working on that.
just a flashing.
Yeah.
In
fact, we're going to have to go and make sure that the old generator powering all these lights is still on after this podcast, using a lot of energy.
And by generator, you mean the guy on a bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, Jeff. Yeah.
No, but yeah, no, I think I'm excited. And these videos that we're making, I just made a stew one for you guys, and I really, really like it. I know that these guys are going to check it out today and let me know, but I think it's cool. It tells a whole idea behind food. And for me, like I said, food to me is creativity, and cooking is creativity, and no one can tell you that you're wrong. So when it comes to doing it, just do it and like it and enjoy it. And if it's your recipe, own it. And if you own it, other people are going to own it with you. It's sort of that whole, if you've ever gone to any sort of seminar that tell you, if you're unconfident about a situation, do the superhero pose. Have you heard that? So if you're scared of a situation, go in the corner and pose like a superhero. And just in that pose, you feel confident and strength because of your thought process goes to all these superheroes. So channel your inner Gordon Ramsay and have confident going in with that dish, and people are going to be confident with it. You know, if I came into a room and I said, this is the best wild game dish I've ever made, people are going to think that's the best wild game dish I've ever made. And they're going to buy into it. You know, Aoudad, not a very good tasting critter. I cooked a meal and I put it before a bunch of Texans. I said, this is the best wild game. And they all ate it. They said, this is amazing. It wasn't the best I've ever done, but the confidence going into that room got everyone excited about it. And now these guys in Texas are eating Aoudad when they swore they never would.
Right.
So find the confidence in yourself and in your cooking. And again, no one can tell you that it's wrong. They can just not like it. So get a glove and some hand sanitizer and tell them to spit it in your hand if they don't like it, and watch people do that. They don't want to do that because they don't want to be rude. So.
There you have it. Cool. Well, we'll close out on that. That's excellent. Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for listening out there, too. Hopefully, you guys get to try some pretty awesome stuff here coming up these holidays. And if you don't have any ideas, check out, it's going out in the newsletter. It's going to be up on the blog.
Vortex Selects, on YouTube.
So you're going to get to see a lot of that stuff. Jeremiah worked with us to show some video, and also then you get the recipes. So get wild with it. And we'd also, why not tell us what you made too? We love seeing pictures and whatnot. So shoot that on over to us, or hit us up in the comments and on YouTube or on Instagram with what you did and how it turned out. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. We'll see you everybody later. Bye. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.